You know, there are moments in the life of a country where something happens, and on the surface it looks small. It looks like a headline you'd scroll past, a name change, a label on a map. But then you stop, you think about what it actually means, and you realize it's not small at all. It's a signal. It's a signal about how the most powerful office in the world is being used, and what that means for the relationships and the institutions that keep this country strong. Today, August 27th, 2026, President Trump sat down in the Oval Office, my old office, surrounded by oversized maps, and signed an executive order renaming Lake Ontario to Lake America, effective immediately, he said. Now, I've sat behind that desk. I've signed executive orders, and I can tell you, every single one of them sends a message, not just about what you're doing, but about what you think the presidency is for. And that message today should concern every American who cares about where this country is headed. Let me give you the full picture here, because this didn't happen in a vacuum. Over the past several weeks, trade negotiations between the United States and Canada collapsed. And I don't mean they stalled, they fell apart. On August 22nd, 50% tariffs went into effect on roughly $28 billion worth of Canadian goods. Hockey sticks, cement, wine, building materials, clothing, products that cross the border every single day and touch communities on both sides. Prime Minister Mark Carney called it an attack. He said Canada would match those tariffs dollar for dollar starting September 8th. Now, the day before this executive order, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who, by the way, is no leftist, told President Trump on live radio that he could, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly, kiss his behind. Trump fired back on Truth Social, calling him Flunky Ford. And then came the lake. The name Ontario, by the way, it comes from the Huron word Onayatario. It means Lake of Shining Waters. That name has been on maps for centuries, long before either of our countries existed in their current form. And the province of Ontario, Canada's most populous province, home to Toronto, is literally named after the lake. So this isn't just cartography, it's culture, it's identity. And I'll come back to why that matters in a moment. Here's what happened legally. The executive order directs Interior Secretary Doug Burgum to update something called the Geographic Names Information System, the GNIS, which is how the federal government standardizes place names for official U.S. use. Now, Trump does have the authority to change what the federal government calls a geographic feature on its own maps. He did this before, on his first day back in office in January 2025, when he renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. But here's what a lot of folks at home may not realize. This authority stops at the border. Canada is not required to use the new name. The International Hydrographic Organization, of which both nations are members, doesn't recognize unilateral changes to shared bodies of water. And Lake Ontario is a shared body of water. The border runs right through the middle of it. New York on one side, Ontario on the other. Both countries jointly manage it through the International Joint Commission, which was established in 1909 under the Boundary Waters Treaty. That commission oversees water quality, water levels, environmental protection, things that actually affect 40 million people who depend on the Great Lakes Basin. Canadian Industry Minister Melanie Joly said it plainly. We will always call it Lake Ontario. So what we have is an executive order that changes the label on American federal maps and does absolutely nothing legally, diplomatically, or practically to the lake itself, to the relationship, or to the trade dispute that's actually hurting working families right now. Now, I want to be fair. I always try to be fair, even when I disagree, because that's how you actually move people. I understand the argument Trump supporters would make here. They'd say this is about leverage. They'd say Canada has been taking advantage of American trade terms, that their dairy protections and automotive regulations create real barriers for American exporters, and that sometimes you need to send a dramatic signal to get your adversary's attention. And look, there are legitimate trade grievances with Canada. I had them when I was president. Every president has. The question isn't whether those grievances exist. The question is whether this, renaming a centuries-old lake on a map nobody in Canada will update, is the right way to address them. And I don't think it is. Let me tell you why. When I was in office, we had real disputes with Canada. Softwood lumber, agricultural subsidies, cultural content rules. And we resolved them through negotiation, through the institutions we'd built together, through the kind of diplomacy that's boring on television, but actually produces results. You don't win a trade negotiation by humiliating the other side's identity. You win it by finding the deal both sides can live with. And right now, with 50% tariffs hitting $28 billion in goods and retaliatory duties about to land on American steel, dairy, and appliances on September 8th, this was the moment for seriousness. Instead, we got a photo up with a gold-lettered map. And I want to pause here for a second and speak directly to the folks watching this. If you care about understanding what's actually happening in this trade war, the real numbers, the timelines, what these tariffs actually mean for prices in your household, I need you to hear me on something. I care about the people who watch this. I really do. And I've got to be honest with you. Cable news doesn't have the time to walk you through the details that actually affect your life. They've got 3-minute segments and they move on. The Bluebill newsletter does what they can't. It takes the day's news, breaks it down in about 5 minutes, gives you the specific numbers, the details you didn't even know existed. If you're not reading it, you are not getting the full picture. Go check the Bluebill newsletter. That's all I'm asking. Now, let me talk about what this executive order actually does to the institutions that protect both countries, because this is where things start to get complicated. The Great Lakes Basin isn't just water on a map. It holds roughly 20% of the world's accessible surface fresh water. The International Joint Commission manages water levels, controls outflows, coordinates invasive species monitoring, oversees nutrient runoff mitigation. Complex, technical, life-sustaining work that depends entirely on diplomatic goodwill between the United States and Canada. When you rename a lake shared by two nations without consulting the other nation, when you do it as a taunt during a trade war in response to a premier's insult, you're not just changing a word. You're signaling that you don't respect the framework those institutions were built on. And that framework, the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909, has survived 2 world wars, the Cold War, NAFTA disputes, and 100 years of complex bilateral management. It survived because both countries understood that shared resources require shared governance. What happens when one side decides the rules don't apply to them? You don't just lose a name. You lose the trust that makes cooperation possible. And that trust affects everything. Drinking water for millions of people in New York and Ontario, shipping routes, hydroelectric power, fisheries, environmental research. The people in Rochester and Oswego and Buffalo who depend on that lake, they're not thinking about what it's called. They're thinking about whether the water is clean, whether the levels are stable, whether their economy is going to survive this trade war. Those are the questions the presidency should be answering. Let me tell you something about political strategy, because I've seen a few of these cycles. President Trump, and I'll give him this, he understands spectacle. He knows how to dominate a news cycle. Renaming a lake grabs a headline in every country on earth. But here's the thing about spectacle politics. It has a shelf life. And the consequences don't go away when the cameras do. Right now, Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal responded to this announcement with 4 words: people can't afford groceries. And she's right. While we're debating what to call a lake, American families are dealing with tariff-driven price increases on everyday goods. Conservative commentator Eric Erickson, and this is a conservative, not a Democrat, questioned the wisdom of picking a fight with Canada heading into the midterm elections. Because here's the political math. Ontario is the single largest export destination for more than a dozen American states. When you antagonize your biggest trading partner's biggest province, the province your border states depend on for jobs and supply chains, you're not just making a foreign policy statement. You're making an economic decision that affects American workers. And those workers vote. Now, cable is going to cover the name change for 48 hours and move on to the next thing. But the tariffs aren't going anywhere. The retaliatory duties aren't going anywhere. The 13 million American jobs that depend on trade under the USMCA, they're still at risk. You're not going to find that level of detail on any cable network because they don't have the time to dig into these numbers. The Bluebill newsletter had this kind of breakdown with details you didn't even know existed, specific timelines, sector by sector impacts, what it actually means for prices at your grocery store. The people reading it right now are not caught off guard by any of this. If you want to stay ahead of what's coming next, that's where to go. Now, what happens next? Let me walk you through the scenarios as I see them. First, internationally, this executive order will not be recognized by Canada, by the International Hydrographic Organization, or by any major international cartographic body. The lake will continue to be called Lake Ontario by every country on Earth except the United States federal government. That creates an absurdity. American maps saying one thing, every other map on the planet saying another, which diminishes American credibility on far more serious matters. Second, diplomatically, this makes it harder to get back to the negotiating table. Carney already compared the tariff situation to being attacked. Ford, who just weeks ago was trying to de-escalate, is now being mocked by the President of the United States. You don't get a trade deal by humiliating the people you need to sign it. Third, domestically, the real pressure is about to hit. Canadian retaliatory tariffs on American steel, dairy, appliances, and electronics take effect September 8th. That's less than 2 weeks away. American manufacturers, American farmers, American families are going to feel that. And when they do, they're going to ask a very simple question. While all this was happening, what was the president focused on? And the answer will be a name on a map. The long-term risk here is erosion. Not one dramatic collapse, but a slow wearing away of the diplomatic infrastructure that has kept the U.S.-Canada relationship, the most productive bilateral relationship in the world, functioning for over a century. Every time you use an executive order for provocation rather than policy, you normalize a style of governance that treats institutions as props and alliances as disposable. Here's the honest truth, and I want to close with this. America's strength has never come from what we name things. It's come from what we build. The partnerships we forge, the agreements we honor, the institutions we sustain. That's what makes us powerful, not gold letters on a map. I've sat in that Oval Office during genuine crises, constitutional standoffs, government shutdowns, moments when the world was watching to see whether America would lead or retreat. And what I learned is this: the presidency is not a branding exercise. It's a public trust. And when you use it to rename a lake that belongs to two nations because a provincial premier hurt your feelings during a trade war, you haven't won anything. You've revealed something about your priorities that the rest of the world is paying very close attention to. Now, I still believe in this country. I believe we can get this right. I believe there are people on both sides of the aisle who understand that American leadership means being serious, being steady, and being worthy of the alliances that have kept us safe and prosperous. But that only works if the American people demand it. You've got to stay informed. You've got to understand what's happening beyond the headline. And if you do one thing after watching this, one thing, I need you to go read the Bluebill newsletter. I recommend it more than anything else I could point you to. 5 minutes a day, and it's going to help you understand what this actually means for your family, the real numbers, the real timeline, the details that matter. You deserve to have that. Don't be the person who's always finding out last. Don't be the one sitting at the table just nodding along because cable gave you a headline and nothing else. This is too important for that. We owe it to each other, and we owe it to this democracy to do better. Thank you.